Hi, this is Philhelm, and I'd like to make a video discussing the Crusades. In part, this is a response to In the End I Was Right, where he briefly mentioned the Crusades, and he was just discussing how sometimes religions get bastardized. Well, I think that sometimes history gets bastardized, and the Crusades are one of the biggest victims to this. All too often, the Crusades are used as just an ad hominem criticism of Christianity in general, and I don't think that it's really very accurate, and I don't think most people even know or understand the Crusades or the medieval world. I'm not here to try to defend Christianity or attack Islam. That has nothing to do with it, because I think the Crusades, while there's definitely a religious component, there's also a political and cultural one. Now, before I go into the Crusades, we have to get into the mindset of medieval Europe. After the fall of the Roman Empire, there was always this thought in the back of their heads that they wanted to reforge the Roman Empire. We see this when the Holy Roman Empire was forged under Charlemagne, and then but what happened after him, when he died, I think it split up to the Western Franks, the Eastern Franks, and the Burgundians, I think it was, in the center. And the Eastern Franks were the more Germanic, up in Germany. Eventually, Germany took up the title of Holy Roman Empire. You see this even with Frederick Barbarossa, who had actually he titled himself Emperor of the Romans. And during the Third Crusade, when he had marched his Crusader force, the German Crusader force, to Constantinople en route to the Holy Land, he'd actually gotten a heated argument with the current emperor of the Byzantines. They finally actually agreed that the Byzantine emperor would be the emperor of the Eastern Romans, and that he would be the emperor of the Western Romans. I mean, this is actually a big deal, because I'm not an expert on this. I mean, I'm not a professor of medieval history, but I have done a lot of research, in my studies. And it was kind of hard to, grasp my mind around the mindset at first. It's like, they're actually almost in arms to this. But then, you try to analyze it and think. I mean, it really was a big deal. That was a big component. The Roman Empire. They always wanted to see, that unified Europe. And I think I can understand that. I mean, if something happened in the United States where, the evil federal government was gone, and we just have the states, but not even in a confederacy, so like no alliance amongst the states at all, I think that we would see, the governors coming out thinking about restoring the United States. I mean, I think that would be in the minds of Americans if something ever happened like that. There would always be in the back of their minds to restore the United States, and I think that's what happened in the medieval world, and that's part of the component to the Crusades, and I'll definitely get into that because I think it's a complex issue. And even in the letter to Saladin, Frederick Barbarossa had, called himself the Romans. He said, we are the ancestors of the Romans. He kept invoking Rome and the Romans. So we have to also remember that under the Roman Empire, that included areas in North Africa as well as in the Holy Land, where Jerusalem is in the Eastern Mediterranean. So there's always, I guess they felt like an ownership of it, in a sense. I mean, there's the Christian component, because those lands were Christian lands, as well as Roman lands. Now, before the Crusades started, you had people who would make pilgrimages to Jerusalem. And that's all well and good. I mean, but it's dangerous. It was a dangerous journey. I mean, not because, you had Muslim Arabs going out and just killing infidel. It was, just thieves, brigands. It was a dangerous journey, so eventually, they started turning into armed pilgrimages in groups. Um, in addition, you have the Byzantine Empire, and they never called themselves the Byzantines. I mean, the Western Christians had called them Greeks. They actually considered themselves Romans. Okay? They had been losing land against Turks, and these aren't like the Ottoman Turks. The Ottomans didn't exist yet, but they were Turks, and they were losing ground against the Turks in Asia Minor. I mean, it was just kind of a long thing. I mean, the Byzantine Empire was going through a long stage where they just kept losing ground. Well, so finally they asked for help, and so the Pope, he gets people to say, hey, we need to help our Christian brothers. I mean, granted, they were Eastern Orthodox, and the Roman, the Latin Roman Catholic Church had kind of drifted away from the Eastern Orthodox. They're kind of like friends who hadn't seen each other in a while. They didn't hate each other, but they were just kind of like, eh. But they viewed each other as Christian brothers. Now, this is important, and I'm going to have to go on an aside here, is that we all hear that in high school and middle school, that they didn't even have nation states back then, right? I mean, we all hear it, we all know it, but I don't think we tend to grasp that. There were no nation states. There was no Germany, there was no Italy, there was no France, no Spain, none of that. So I think that Christianity was an important part of that culture. I think it gave Europe in general, while it's completely divided into different, vassals, Christianity was kind of like a glue, a cultural glue. So I think that, even though they wouldn't be like, rah, 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 I'm a vive la France, they would still feel a connection due to Christianity. So when the Byzantines asked for help against the Muslims, who had also, taken Jerusalem, I think that it was more of a cultural and political component, and it was definitely a defensive action. I mean, because you had with the rise of Islam, you had the Muslims taking lands that were formerly Roman and Christian. They went into the Holy Land, into Asia Minor. They swept through Egypt, along North Africa, and these were all Christian Roman lands, and into the Iberian Peninsula, and even attacking into France. I think, what was it, the Battle of Tours, where they were fought back. So there's definitely something going on here. And yes, there's definitely a religious component, and I think even the same with the Muslims, is that, because not all the Muslims are Arab, and not all people in the Middle East are Arab. Let's get that straight. But they were, even amongst the Muslims, I would say they had that common glue, cultural glue, since they didn't have nation states, and that being Islam. And the same for the Christians. So yes, so I don't see it was so much. It wasn't so much. The Christians weren't trying to convert. Conversion was never the goal. Except I would say in the Baltic, because I would say there's three fronts to the Crusades. Usually when people speak of the Crusades, they talk about the Latin East, the Holy Land, Jerusalem, and the Crusader, the Kingdom of Jerusalem and the Crusader states. And then there's also the Iberian Peninsula, the Reconquista, which lasted from 711 to 1492. And then you had a smaller, I guess the smallest and least recognized front would be in the Baltic, where the Teutonic Crusaders were attacking into Prussia and beyond. And now they were actually forcibly converting. And that was a no-no, even according to the church, but they did it anyway. It is what it is. But it wasn't actually officially condoned a practice. It was more basically the Germans trying to attack what they viewed as barbarians. And I guess there's a belief that if they could Christianize them, they would civilize them, or at least get... And there's this kind of an element of truth to that. I mean, even if it's forceful, getting people to adhere to a similar culture. Because that's what I view. I mean, Christianity was part of the culture, right? So, So there, there's a lot going on in the medieval world. So okay, the Byzantines ask for help. So the Crusaders, and the only really successful crusade was the First Crusade. I mean, I think there's considered either 7 to 9 crusades, depending on what scholars count as a crusade, but let's just say there's up to 9. The First Crusade was the only successful one, and the Crusades were never a big deal to the Muslims, really, but I'll get into that later.